Today, I think it's time to talk about your deepest, darkest fears.
Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
Okay, maybe not that particular fear. How about the fear you get after you spend all the time hooking up your preamp and electronics in your bass, and all you get is glorious silence? So the good news is there's really not a whole lot that can go wrong with these preamps. It's really just a process of trying to isolate where the problem is so we can correct it. This is a lot like playing the game of 20 questions. The best way to play that game, of course, is try to ask questions that would knock the potential answers down by half. And that's exactly what we do when we do diagnostics. So as we walk through this example, we're going to be talking about a setup that has a pair of pickups going into an active blend control, going into a volume control, then going into the LHZ preamp, from there into the mid-range control, and then to an output jack. The diagnostics process generally starts in the middle. What I like to do first is determine if the preamp is working and if the problem is upstream or downstream from the preamp. So this is kind of our starting point. When we're starting, we want to have a fresh 9-volt battery plugged in, and we're using a standard guitar cord, not a TRS cable, plugged between the bass and the amp is on, so that way we'd expect to get sound out of the amp when things are working. So step one is to actually remove the input connector from the LHZ preamp, and then touching those input pins with either a small screwdriver or your finger. This test will give us one of two results. Either we're going to hear a cracking, popping, humming noise coming out of your amp, or you're not. Why do we start here? So this test actually tells us several things. If we do get noise, that tells us we've got power on at the preamp and everything downstream is working fine. If we don't get noise, that tells us it's either the preamp or something downstream. So let's walk through those scenarios. Let's assume that we've touched it and we've got no sound. The next step is then to plug that output jack directly into the preamp. So this bypasses the mid control. It takes it out of the circuit completely. Then we repeat this test. We touch those input pins with a screwdriver or your fingertip and listen for noise. Well, if we have noise this time, we've identified that the mid control is the problem. This is where we're going to want to look at for wiring problems. There's only a few things that can actually go wrong with this module, and it's usually connectors plugged into the wrong pins. They're plugged in upside down. You don't have power applied. You have to have that red jumper wire going from the plus V pins on the preamp into the power input on the mid control, or the mid control might be touching the cavity walls and shorting something out. Those are your typical failure points on this. So let's say we did this test and we still did not have any sound. Okay, we've narrowed it down a little bit. We know it could be the preamp. It could be something with the output jack wiring. So the next test we're going to do is actually to verify we've got power at the preamp. We'll take your multimeter and set it to read voltage, and then we're going to put the red lead and touch it to the plus bat pin. This is where the red battery wire comes into the preamp. And we're going to take the black lead and we're going to touch it to the ground pin of the input. This is important. We're not measuring the battery voltage coming in. By measuring voltage at the ground pin of the input, we're actually measuring switched voltage, which means when you plug that guitar cord into the jack, it should be closing the switch and powering up the preamp. So we should have 9 volts there. So the outcome of this test is obviously one of two things. Either we do have voltage or we don't. If we do have voltage, then we probably have a preamp issue, because we know the jack wiring is okay. So if it's the preamp, there's only a few things that can go wrong here. We want to check the power polarity, make sure plus is plus and minus is minus. We have everything plugged in the right places. We want to look for physical damage on the board. This sometimes happens if you're pressing really hard on it. And we want to make sure the board isn't shorted out against anything. Now, if we did not read voltage during that voltage test, this really narrows us down on our jack wiring. The output jack acts like a power switch. When you plug in that cord, it conducts power from the ring to the sleeve, and that powers up the preamp and pickups if you have active pickups. So by not measuring any voltage on the board, that tells us there's something with that jack wiring that's the problem. So now we'll look at the jack and make sure that the TRS pins are wired correctly We'll want to make sure that the connector on the LHZ is in the right orientation with the white wire going to the pin labeled tip. And we want to make sure that there's nothing shorted out or we don't have any cold solder joints somewhere. So let's go back up to the top and start over again with that first test. Let's say that we've touched those 2 input pins and we did hear that clicking and popping and humming that tells us that everything downstream is okay. So now we need to look at everything between the pickups and that input signal to see where the break is. So we'll do the same test moving upstream now. The first test will be to plug the blend output directly into the LHZ input. This will bypass the volume control, much like we bypass the blend control on the backside. And then we're going to try and play the bass. Do we have any sound? It's either going to be a yes or no. If it's yes, well then great. We know that the pickups are okay. We know the blend is okay. We've got a problem with the volume control. Again, the common scenarios here are that cables are plugged in backwards or to the wrong pins. The sockets may not be plugged in properly. And there may be physical shorts with the control touching something else that's shorting it out. If you did not hear sound, then we're going to take it a step further. We're going to take the output from a single pickup and we're going to plug it directly into the LHZ preamp. This bypasses the blend and the volume control, so it's just pickup straight into the preamp. Again, play it and listen for sound. If you did hear sound, then we know we have a problem with the blend control. Again, very similar issues we were looking for on the mid control. The worst possible case at this test, of course, is that with the pickups plugged directly into the preamp, we don't have sound. This brings us to something with the pickup wiring. If you have EMG pickups, they have modular connectors on the back. It's possible those may be reversed and plugged in upside down, so the power is not going to the right inputs. You'll want to look to see if those wires were spliced or soldered. You'll want to check those connections for cold solder joints or bad connections or being shorted out somewhere. If they're active pickups, we'll want to make sure that they are getting power to their red power leads to power them up. Okay, so I know I've covered a lot of territory in a very short amount of time, and it seems like I might have oversimplified. All I was really doing is taking you through the big steps of identifying where the problem is. Narrowing that focus to look at specific problems, that's when you email me. I'm happy to work with you to solve those. We do test every one of our components before they ship, so we have high confidence that what you've received is a working component. But in the quality world, we always aim for 100%, but assume we didn't quite get it because life finds a way, as they say in Jurassic Park. If it does turn out to be a problem with your components, we're happy to exchange it at no cost for you, so there's really no risk on your side. I hope this helps you. This is a process we use on our preamps, but this is the same process you can use on any sort of electronics issue when you're trying to diagnose where you have a break in your signal chain. Hope that helps. Till next time.